Hey guys, good evening out there on the interwebs. I forgot to put an intro on this video, so that's why it's here in my office, my shed. This is the beginning of part 2 of the powertrain swap for the 2010 Ford Fusion Jadzia. We're going to see, this is where we take parts, we go from old to new, we run into a couple of speed bumps, we get it sorted out, and we get the engine and transmission ready to be dropped back in, which will occur in part 3. Sit down, grab the beverage of your choice, kick back, and enjoy. So begins part 2. Hello everyone, it is the next day, and we just got back from town. We had to run some errands, get some parts and bits and baubles, so that we'd be ready to do everything we need to do today. So one of those bits and baubles, I needed a 26mm wrench, and you need that because we got to swap these cooler lines. That's a 26mm bolt. It's kind of a goofy looking one, but it is a 26mm. There's two you got to worry about. This is the other one, just to show you. It does fit. And we're going to lift the bracket for the transmission mount. Hopefully that will give us enough swing room to get in here. As you can see, you can get in, but then you can't do anything. And if that doesn't work, we're going to try to take the box end and thread it all the way down the line until we get it here, and then get it off that way.
Yeah, we're going to avoid that because all that stuff clipped together, and I don't want to play that game.
So we're going to get on that, and I'll update you as we go. So this may not apply to you, but this is an excellent opportunity that if your engine bay has gotten gross because of oil leaks, which is exactly what's happened here, get some engine degreaser. I just happened to grab what was at Walmart, so they had gunk in stock. That's what I grabbed. And essentially for this stuff, you spray it down, you wait about 10-15 minutes, and then hit it with water. We're going to use the softest, least intense pressure washing tip I have, which is the white one, I believe. And we're going to hit it mainly over here in this corner. That's where there were multiple oil leaks. And we actually realized once we got the engine out that the front crank seal, the front main, is leaking. So it's a good thing we're doing this, because that would have had to come out anyway. Just want to give you that update. Meanwhile, brother is working on preparing the transmission to getting the stuff we need from the old transmission to swap on the new one. One of the things that we discovered yesterday after we could pull the old powertrain out, which is right there, versus the engine that we received at the salvage yard, is that the wire harnesses are not the same. So we're going to have to reuse our existing harness, which is not a terrible thing. The existing harness is in pretty good shape. Most of the connectors are still solid. So we will do updates on that as we move along. This is the results of 2 rounds of gunk and then spraying everything down with the white tip on my pressure washer. And it looks really good. Does it look brand new? No, I didn't want to go crazy up over here. We have AC lines that are capped over here. You know, our engine computer is back here. Fuse box is here. We got some big break-off connectors over here. So I didn't want to go too crazy, so I didn't spray everything. I didn't scrub anything with a brush. I just sprayed it and hit it with the pressure washer. It got a bunch of junk off. The rack and pinion looks amazing. And overall, I am pretty pleased with a quick, clean job here. This is good practice. When I go to work on that one, the engine bay has a lot more years on it and a lot more grease. So that one's going to be a much bigger job to take care of. All right, bring you back when I got something. Update. Once we were able to get a little bit more maneuvering room, this is the one in the back, but for this guy up here in the front, where my brother's hand is, we were able to take it at a high angle and break it loose. And it turns out it's not This line is not in there tight. So we managed to break it loose, and it's mostly, you can spin it off with your fingers, but occasionally have them get the wrench in at really funky angles like that. You can get away with that if something's fairly loose, but at higher torque values that would just slip. But we can get away with it with this. So hopefully in your application it's not crazy tight. And these lines do have, I think there's an O-ring. Yeah, there it is. Okay, my help had to leave unexpectedly today, so I'm not going to do any work on trying to separate transmissions and putting things together. But what I will do is a lot of those little tiny things that you don't want to do but kind of need to get done so you can do the big things. Like changing out this bracket here. This is the battery tray bracket. As you can see, it's covered in rust. And what happened there is there was a battery at one point that was cracked, sitting in the tray, leaking acid, and it corroded everything around it. So, turns out you can remove this. There are two, zoom in. There are two bolts there. They are, I'm pretty sure they're 10 millimeters. And you just take them out, tray comes out. Went to the junkyard this morning, picked up a new tray. And also while we were at the junkyard, picked up a new starter. Here it is. It's got miles on it, but it looks to be in good shape. And the whole reason why we did that was, even though the old starter has been working reliably, see if I can't find it here. I stuck it somewhere. There it is. As you can see, it is really rusted up. And what caused that was the leaking battery acid. The starter hangs out pretty close to the battery tray. So though the teeth look okay, the Bindex looks like it's working okay, decided to go ahead and swap it out. It only cost me 20 bucks. Brand new AutoZone Duralast Gold would be 300, so I think I got a pretty good deal. So the agenda for the rest of the day is, we know that this harness needs to make its way over here, and we know that this harness needs to go away because it's of no use to us. It is significantly different than the Fusion harness. And we know these cooler lines right here that we finally got out, they need to be flushed. I got some cooler clean, and we're gonna take care of that. And we know that the thermal blanket that runs along here needs to be refreshed, and I purchased that this morning at the auto parts store, so we'll take care of that. The reason why is it runs right, you've got a big wire loom here, and it runs right next to the EGR valve and the pipe. EGR, if you don't know, stands for exhaust gas recirculation. So this gets really, really hot because you have really hot exhaust gases going through it, which is why the thermal blanket's here. We're going to replace it. The loom itself is beat up, but the wires in the loom are perfectly fine. We'll go ahead and take care of that. And that'll be pretty easy to do once I get the harness off. So that's what I'm doing the rest of today. I will bring you guys back occasionally as I find things that are interesting, that are not fairly self-explanatory. This exhaust shield gets to stay because we already have it. Well, I'll get the shield, but we do have the manifold. But we don't have this manifold, shield, or O2 sensor, so this is going to come over. And I'll work on that. So that's what we're doing. So I'm working over here by the alternator, which is this guy here, if you don't know what that is. Alternator has two connections on it. This one is a push it down, pull it out. Still trying to figure out where exactly to push. This is actually a nut. You get the cover off. Thinking that's a 13 right there. And at the end of this harness leg, you've got this weird looking thing. And what this actually is it sits like that on a post, cable routing. Then this is your connector into the for the AC clutch and the compressor. So again, it's a push it down back here, gets it loose. You don't need to take it loose at that end. You can just let it dangle, unless I find that the other compressor doesn't have it, and then we'll go from there. And just keep working my way around. I'm gonna get this out of all of this out of the way so I can go after this exhaust manifold. All right, so did some more figuring, and I figured out that there are two distinct harnesses. Zoom out here. There are two distinct harnesses that run across the block. One is what I will call the engine harness that services the fuel injectors, cams, EGR system, any sensor that is directly involved with the engine. And then there's a second harness that is what I call an accessory harness, and that is the one that services the alternator, the AC, kind of runs over this way. And I have it removed, the one from the Fusion, and it's here. And I have compared it to the one that came from our new block, which actually came out of a Ford Escape, which, if you don't know what that is, that's one of their SUV light vehicles. And they're not the same. The alternator wire is more simple, so we're going to have to reuse the Fusion harness. Not a big deal. But the good news I found is looking at the engine harness that's already attached here on our new, it looks to be identical to the one that's already on the Fusion, so I don't have to swap that. And if you're doing this at home on your own vehicle, you don't have to do that. So I will I'll leave this harness alone, and I will leave that harness alone because I don't need to fool it anymore. I've got an exhaust manifold to pull, heat shield to pull, heat shield over here to pull, and I will need to swap the alternator and the AC compressor. Can't do that until this engine is in the air, so I'll just pull it today, and I'll have to shove some rags in the compressor because, as I mentioned before, you don't want to let any contaminant into your HVAC system because then they're not going to be able to recharge the system, and I think their machine throws an error, and sad face because then you have to flush it and pay extra. As you can see, I actually already have rags in it. I forgot because we had to pull this line as we were doing the final lift to get the block out. It was gonna break the nipple on the radiator that goes to the overflow coolant reservoir. So I'll keep working on that. I'll figure out how we swing this idler arm so that we can get tension off this belt. My brother tells me it's brand new, and we'll just keep getting stuff staged, keep moving. Alrighty, so I am working on the exhaust manifold. The bolts on the manifold proper, they're not bolts, they're actually nuts, and they are 13 millimeter. You're going to need a wrench, you're going to need a deep well socket, you're going to need a deep well socket with extension. Depending on which one you're working on, you need those tools to get in there. The heat shield that goes here, here, and then there's, yep, right there, there, and there. Those are 8 millimeter, not too bad. You need to move those because to finish dropping this, you've got a 10 right there and another 10 right there. Do that, and not only does that part of the manifold drop, but the part that runs under is going to drop as well. You can disconnect the under part if you need to, right here. I'm not going to try that. Those look kind of scary. I'm kind of waiting. I tried to budge those 10 millimeters and they laughed at me. So I hit them with some penetrating lubricant. My beverage of choice is PB Blaster. Let that soak a bit, see what I can do, because I don't want to get heat on it unless I have to, because this oil filter is perfectly good. We would like to reuse it, but you can't reuse it if you burn a hole in your oil filter. That's just, it doesn't work. So I moved over here. You may notice that the accessory belt is now gone. The way you do that is, this is the idler pulley, like I thought, and it's actually refreshingly simple how you do this. Get a 1/2, wiggle it in there, and then just pull up. Well, I was able to pull it up. I had to put one hand on the engine because, you know, we're hanging, so don't have the weight of the engine to help me out. Pull it up, that'll release tension off the belt. Belt comes right off. Got it sitting over there. Now that that is done, I can work on pulling these bolts for the alternator and the bolts for the AC compressor. That looks like a that looks like maybe a 12, and this is looking more like 15. But I'll verify those as I yoink on them, and then I'll bring you back. All right, progress update. So you can see the exhaust manifold is now off. So after giving it some time to soak with penetrating oil, I came back to it. I wound up having to use the weight of the block as an advantage. This guy was really stuck, and you can see why. It's a much bigger thread, harder to move. Little Jude came right off. That wasn't a big deal. And then over here, you'll notice that the alternator and the compressor are gone. They're chilling out down here now. So this is a 10mm bolt. Not too bad to get off. Just have a hand ready when you're working on that last bolt, because it's going to fall like a brick, because, you know, it's just a big chunk of metal. Alternator was a little harder, bigger bolts. These are 15mm. So you have one bolt, two nuts. These are studs that stick out of the engine block, so don't worry about that. And I've got everything threaded back on because, like I said, I'm not going to try to lift this. This is something I'm coordinating with my brother for just absolute safety. I cannot afford to get hurt. There's got too many irons in the fire, so I have some flexibility time-wise on this project, so I'm not going to try to lift it myself. And what we would do is the plenum would come off, and we'd repeat this, except for we'd keep the valve covers on, because now we know that we can do a pretty good lift off the plenum. And also, we still have to separate the transmission out because we need the flex plate. We got a torque converter. That came with the new transmission, so that's a 35,000 mile torque converter. But we need that flex plate. So this guy's going to chill out until I can get my help back over here, probably next weekend. Anyway, enough squirreling. So I'm putting all the hardware back in over here so I don't lose it. I've got the 4 nuts on the heat shield, or the 4 bolts. I'm going to put those back in. Put it back, the heat shield back on again, so I don't lose the hardware. There's a ton of little bits and bobs, very easy to lose unless you stick it somewhere where it can't run away. And great place to stick it. So at this point, I think I will take a look-see and how to flush out these cooler lines, and I can go ahead and get that done. I'm not real worried about moisture getting in the lines, but I want to get, 10 plus years of garbage out of there. That's what the cooler clean is all about. And then I will take our thermal blanket stuff, which is, this is like a thermal blanket tape. This is great, we get to use it again, but the AC line that is, let me zoom in, sitting right there, as you can see, it's a little bit patchy. So I'm gonna, I guess, rewrap that, and that'll be about it today, because can't really do much else until we get the transmission separated. So bring it back. Alright, updates. So I took the heat shield from here. Again, it's 8mm nuts or bolts. I mix this up. I'm sorry, folks. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But I took a look, and we do have, let me zoom in. Take a look there. We've got the top of the manifold. Go back to regular zoom. But we don't have this bottom piece here. I'm not sure if this is the catalytic converter or a resonator, but we don't have it. So that means we gotta get this loose, and we've got a pair of nuts here that gotta come loose. So I'll bring you back when I've got that figured out. Okay guys, pro tip. If you have a bolt like this that's really stuck, which this one is, I've already hit it with penetrating oil, but it's still laughing at me, and you need to get a hammer out to help break it loose. Don't use anything that ratchets, because what you're going to do is you're going to put a lot of stress on the ratcheting teeth of whatever you're using, and you'll wear it prematurely. So if you got one, break out your regular wrench that you don't feel too bad if you got a bead on it, and get it set up and flush, and then start whacking away at it. But try not to use your ratcheting stuff, because what'll happen, and I've done this, is eventually it gets a bit hard to do. You can put some oil in there and that'll help, but you're wearing down the teeth. That's what I'm getting at. So as you can see, everything below the manifold is now gone. Got it off. So get everyone caught up. These are 15mm nuts. Hit them with some penetrating oil. They're going to be really stiff, but I got those out. Then these were 13mm nuts, and this also needed to come out in order to get the catalytic converter out, which is what this is. Dead giveaway is when you look inside, it looks like honeycomb. So this is an emissions device. It cleans up the exhaust so that basically you get carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and that's about it. It's carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and water, mostly. And that's due to this. Cleans it up quite a bit. So this vehicle has 2 cats. We got one here. The other one is right there. Another dead giveaway is generally your O2 sensor is going to be right after the catalytic converter. The term is it's downstream. So don't forget, you got to push down the connector, disconnect this before you try to pull this guy off. I had to take this collar off first. That fought me pretty hard. Got it off. So now we can take all that. It'll bolt in onto the new block. And I think I am pretty much done with pulling things off of this, except for transmission, which I'm going to wait for help on. So I think the next item on my list is going to be spraying out these cooler lines. Why do I need to spray out the cooler lines? There's junk that's probably built up in there over the past 10, 12 years. And we want to make sure that whatever that junk is, it does not get sent into the transmission that we're bolting in, the new one. So we flush out these lines, make sure they're nice and clean before we bolt everything back in, so that we don't have any of the material that potentially doomed the old transmission lingering in these lines. So I think that is my next stop. Oh, one other thing. When you have your alternator off or anything that has a pulley on it, it's a great time to do this. Spin your pulley. It should be very, very quiet and pretty easy to spin. As you can see, this one's quiet. It's easy to spin. So the bearings on this pulley are still good, which is nice. And if you do the same thing for the clutch on the AC, on the compressor here, there we go. Spins well, it's quiet. Same deal. This is a relatively recent compressor. The clutch died not that long ago, and it was replaced by a mechanic. So these are good. It's always a good thing to check if you got it in your hands instead of just slapping it back in willy-nilly. So I think and move on to cooler lines. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a new day, and we're going to pick up where I left off. So one thing I did miss is this drive shaft extension shaft that goes from the transmission, and it would go over to the passenger CV axle. That bracket and the shaft itself need to be ready to move, and also my brother was able to get back over today, so we're going to make a pretty hard push, get the transmission off. As you can see, the bolt here is a 13 millimeter. So I should, yep, okay, that wasn't that tight. Take it off. Whoops, alright, anyway, I'll bring you guys back when we're getting ready to tackle the transmission. Alright guys, we are going after the transmission. Thus far we have pulled 3 bolts. They are 13 millimeter. We have pulled 1 bolt. It goes right here. It is a short bolt. We pulled 1 bolt. It goes right here. That was a long bolt. And I've pulled the bolt right here. And that also was a short bolt. As we go around, I'll document that. Okay, so we're standing on the other side of the engine now. And this bolt right here was another long bolt. And then this one here is short. And that leaves, we believe, just, sorry about that, just these 2 up top, here and here. Don't know the long or short. We have to do some prep because we expect that, you know, as we take these out, transmission's heavy, it's going to drop. We need to set up, probably going to stick a piece of wood right here so that we have something to land this on.
And of course we will lower it to where it's just an inch or 2 above our landing surface. We're not going to drop it from 3 feet up. Don't do that. If you do that, don't sue us. We're just going to laugh at you.
I mean, this transmission is bad. It's dying, but it still could be a core for somebody if I can find somebody who will take it as a core. So we're going to work on that, and I'll bring you back when we go to crack those last 2 bolts. All right, we took the 2 out of the top. They were short bolts. Go right there. And then we found there was 1 more bolt. It's kind of weird. It's basically just a threaded stud, and it has a nut at either end. But it goes right there. Or sorry, it goes right here. So that was also a 13 millimeter. You'll need something to grab onto one side so you can actually get it out. As you can see, we've started on the processes of separating the transmission. That's an alignment dowel right there. We have a 2-pound rubber mallet. We're just tapping away, kind of wiggling it off. And then we'll take a peek at what it looks like once we get it off. All right, transmission is off. So that's the torque converter, and there's the ring gear and flex plate. Here is the transmission itself. So at this point, we realized that to get to the torque converter bolts, you actually have to access them from behind the flex plate. That's kind of goofy. There should be 4 of them, and there's a little rubber flap you have to access from. It is, let's see if we can see it. May not be able to see it because of light levels, but right there, you have to get at it from under the oil pan. You put a socket on the crank pulley, and then you're going to rotate the crank, pulling the torque converter around to get to the 4 bolts, get them loose. Then we can get the old torque converter off, which allows us to get to the flex plate, which we need. So I'll bring you back as we get working on that. Okay, so I have removed the rubber flap. It goes right there, and you can see there is a nut on a stud there. That is for the torque converter. There are 4 of these. I believe they are 13 millimeter. So we're going to start breaking those loose, and I'll bring you back when we're done. The crank bolt, snout bolt here, this is an 18 millimeter. Good thing to rotate this with would be just a socket and a breaker bar. And also, if you haven't done so already, take the spark plugs out so you have almost zero compression. That will make the engine much easier to turn. Okay, torque converter is off, and what you're looking at now is the flex plate, which is what we're actually after. Torque converter nuts are here. There's 4 of them. It turns out they were 15 millimeter. They're at these 4 points. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just 90-degree turn each time. Had to fight them a bit, but got them out. Old torque converter is there. Didn't see anything obvious as a failure mode there. So the failure is probably inside the transmission proper, in the clutch packs or something like that. So we need to get these loose. We suspect that they're held in place with the red thread locker, which can
17.
just about survive a nuclear apocalypse. And we're going to work on getting these out, and then we'll inspect the flex plate to make sure we can reuse it, and then we will go from there. And as you can hear with the other commentary, since we don't have the compression of the engine to work with, we're going to have to come up with some way to lock this in tight.
Yeah,
okay, flex plate. So it turns out they're 17 millimeter. They did not have any red thread locker on them. So they came out pretty easily with an impact. That's how we got around not having engine compression. Flex plates are really light. They don't need to carry mass like a flywheel does on a manual. And when you're going to try to reuse one, you need to look for cracks in the surface, front and back. And you also want to inspect the ring gear, because this is what engages your starter. Considering this has 222,000 miles on it, this ring gear is in pretty good shape. There is a little bit of chewy in a couple of spots on one side, but it's mainly surface, so I'm going to go ahead and reuse this. I need to buy a new one. And I don't believe that you ever have to refinish or surface a flex plate like you would if you were going to try to reuse a flywheel. So right now, okay, looks like you got it. My brother just removed a plate.
No, it's still there.
Oh, still here?
Yeah, I shot a little PV on it.
Oh.
I don't want to kink it prying it, so I'm letting the PV loosen it a little bit.
I stand corrected. That's what I get for looking at witness marks. This is called it actually has a ton of different names, but I call it the starter shim plate. And as the name implies, it is a very specifically measured piece that is a very particular thickness, so that when you install the starter, it is automatically shimmed to the correct distance to engage the ring gear on the flex plate. You need this piece. Otherwise, you have to try shimming your starter with washers, which, with the way that this starter mounts, I don't think you can do that. So you need this piece to get appropriate spacing. So if you're doing this kind of swap like we're doing right here, don't forget this piece. Don't forget to bring it over, because they are a devil to find online. I had to get one from the junkyard for another project I'm doing, and it took over a year for the right kind of vehicle showed up where I could get the one I needed. So we're going to get this off, and then at this point we'll find a spot to put this old block down. We'll grab the last couple of things that we're going to need to move over. We'll get the new block up, and we'll start loading it up with goodies, and that'll probably be it for tonight. We need to research the torque values for the flex plate, the torque values for the torque converter. I need to find some measurements about how far in the torque converter should be when it's installed correctly, and some other stuff. So I'll bring you back when we get to another spot of importance. Okay, so at this point we're just grabbing the last couple of things that we need to transfer. This is one of the mount brackets. Those are 15 millimeter nylocks. get them out. Comes right off. So I'm just going to set this down, and again, until I get my new block up in the air, I'm just going to be putting bolts and nuts and whatnot where they go, so I don't lose them, and then I'll transfer things over. So I think this is the last thing that we really need to grab. So we're going to take this old block, figure out what the heck we're going to sit it down on, grab the new one, do our switcheroo, and I'll bring you back. All right, so this is our replacement engine. We've got it on the crane, got a tire under it. So we're basically done for the night. I have to go do other stuff and things. I've got rags shoved in the plenum to make sure that foreign material does not fall in. Matters on this guy. Don't care about this guy because he's a core or a tear down. But it turns out this engine will sit on its own if you put it down real nice and gentle. It is top heavy, so don't expect to play football with it and expect it not to fall over. Here's the old transmission, peeing fluid everywhere. It's leaking out of one of the CV axle spline shaft areas. Not a big deal. So next steps are to take all the things that I took off and put it back on. And most of them, a torque value is not going to matter. But more importantly, I need to get the torque values necessary for the torque converter and the clearances, because torque converters, it's very important that they're sitting in the correct place in the transmission, and particularly after they get bolted into the flex plate in the block. Because if you have it wrong, you destroy it within about 5 seconds after turning the car on. So I'm going to go find that. I'm going to sign out for the night. Welcome back, everyone. It's the next day, and I'm working solo. So I'll be just putting things back on the new block, which we got hung up last night. One of the first things we're going to do so that we can get the alternator and the AC compressor back on is this bracket needs to be snugged down. Otherwise, you can't get the alternator on, because the alternator rides on these two studs, and then the AC compressor is below that. So I'm going to tighten that up. My eyeball tells me that's probably a 10 millimeter. We'll get that tightened up and keep moving forward. Okay, wanted to bring you guys back to briefly look at how the belt's supposed to run. So you see it goes over the crank, comes down under the air conditioning compressor, loops around the alternator, and then it goes under your idler pulley. So to get this on, it's actually pretty straightforward. I covered this in the removal, but I didn't actually film it. So I'm going to try to film it now. Just bear with me here. So you get a 1/2 in, and then you just lift. You can see that motion there, and that loosens up the pulley. You'll see that I took the slack out, put it back on. And that's all you do. It's pretty straightforward. There's a lot less devices in it than on older vehicles. So as you can see, the alternator, air compressor back on, the belt's back on. Next thing I'm going after is going to be rebuilding or transferring the exhaust on both sides, and then I'll probably swap the oil filters. All right, this segment should be called "One of These Things Is Not Like the Other." So this came from an Escape. It's got this 3 Torx bolt bracket on it. When you look at the same thing on the old Fusion block, there is a bracket there. As you can see, it's a whole lot smaller. It's a pair of hex heads, so I'm going to do a little swapperoo there. And then I'll bring you guys back, so I keep building stuff out. That looks like to be 15s right there. Let's see. I know these are 15s now. Yeah. Says 15. That's going to be like a T30, T40 Torx over there. And if you're doing a fusion to fusion swap, it won't even matter. But just thought I'd point this out in case it comes up for somebody else. All right, turned out those were 13 millimeters. I got them broken loose and moved, and the Torx that were over here are T50s, but I was able to break them loose with a T45 because I do not have a T50. So onwards to the exhaust, I promise. All right, got the tin back on, and I've got the exhaust, the precats back on, all the way down to where we meet up with the main, I guess it'd be a Y pipe. But what I wanted to show is we've run into an incompatibility issue. I believe it's only just in the plug style. So this is it's a 4-pin. The pins are rounded, and it's supposed to plug in here, except for here, where my hand is. As you can see, it's more of a rounded square. If I can get that to come in. Let's see here. Come on. Okay, it's misbehaving, but this is more of a rounded square, and inside of it, it has 4 flat pins. So what I'm going to have to do is, actually, that might not work. My initial thought was to de-pin this connector and then grab the connector, this style connector that's on the fusion harness, and just bring it over. But if the pins are truly different, if these are round and those are flat, I need to double verify that. That's not going to work. So it may be that I'm going to have to get my O2 sensor socket, break this guy loose, and I may have to replace that sensor just because this connector is different. I mean, it's the same engine, so the voltage readouts are going to be the same. This is one of those just Ford things. I'll have to investigate that further, and I'll get back with you. All right, so I confirmed that the connector here has flat pins. The O2 sensor that went here uses round pins. So even if I de-pinned and swapped the connectors, that's not going to fix this problem. I'm going to have to get a 2010 Fusion, or no, a 2011 Escape O2 sensor that I'm sure it'll screw right into that. That's a standardized bung. And then it should connect up to this. I'm going to have to go price that out. It's kind of frustrating, but even so, salvage yard did not lie to me. This is something I want to make clear. When you ask a salvage yard to use interchange to find a block that's going to work, the interchange is going to do exactly that. The block, the part that contains the oil pan and the pistons and the cylinders, all that stuff, cylinder head, that will be the same if interchange says it's the same. However, harnesses and accessories may be different. Keep that in mind. So, for example, I talked about this earlier, but this is a great time to bring it up. The harness that feeds the accessories over here is different between the Escape, which we have that one, and the Fusion. So as I am swapping over a Fusion alternator and a Fusion AC compressor, I need that Fusion harness. It's not going to work otherwise. Just throwing that out there. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back for another night of wrenching. So when we left off, I was going to have to source a new O2 sensor because of a connector and pin incompatibility between the Fusion harness and the Escape harness. And when I dove into that, what I found is that Ford just made a change between 2010 and 2011 on the style of connector and the style of pin. I have no clue why, but they did. Because when I checked against the 2011 Fusion, same thing. 2010 Escape used the older style connector, so When I dug in even further, I verified that in 2010 and 2011, this right here, this O2 sensor is a narrow band sensor, which means it has a more narrow voltage range that it reports to the ECU, or the engine computer. So what that really boils down to is I could have used the old sensor if I had been willing to not only swap the D-pin and repin the connectors, but also cut the ends off and swap the pins themselves and do some soldering or crimping, and I didn't want to do that. So I picked up the new part, plugs in perfectly. It should not cause any kind of a check engine light or anything like that. It already had dielectric grease, or anti-seize, excuse me. Already had some anti-seize right here, so that hopefully this will come out easy in the future. And it's a 22 millimeter. Just kind of crank on it there, and that's fairly tight. You don't have to murder it. And then plug it in. Just gotta line up the pieces. If I can get them to line up. Oh, here we go. And just like that. Okay, so that problem is solved. But then I created a new problem last night as well. So there are 2 bolts, and you can kind of see it here. Take my finger and point it out. Right there is one, and then it has a buddy. It's right there. And that one went in okay, but I was lazy and I didn't center this correctly. So long story short, I have damaged the helicoil, which is the threading inside of the hole. And I think this is needed. I can't just skip it because this is going to isolate the catalytic converter to keep it from banging around. And catalytic converter, the actual honeycomb inside is fairly brittle. So you don't want it banging around. That's how you break your cat. And on a modern engine, that kind of it's more important than an older one. To that end, I purchased some goodies at our local Harbor Freight this evening. I have purchased a metric tap and die set. Now, I'm hoping to use the tap to clean up the threads so I can get this fixed and working. Just wanted to go ahead and throw out as a disclaimer, a tap is the wrong tool for this. The correct tool is a thread chaser. In my city, we are small enough, we don't have any proper tools like thread chasers. So, closest I could do was get a tap. You can do what you need to do with a tap, but you have to be very, very careful because taps cut new threads. But they can also reshape old ones if you insert them correctly. A thread chaser is only going to reshape a thread. It doesn't have the ability to cut thread. So what all that's going to entail is to get a straight shot, this manifold has to come back off. And then just move the whole thing out of the way. The oil filter will have to come off. And then go at it. And I'll show you that in process, but I'll need both hands to do it because taps are unforgiving, they're very brittle. And if you snap a tap off in a hole and you snap it low, you are in a world of pain, and I really want to avoid that. The other thing I noticed was for this engine mount here, you notice there's 3 holes, but when I put it in position, there's only 2 studs. That's a problem. So I need to snag a stud from over at the old block. Now I keep saying stud because these aren't welded in, they're screwed in. See this Torx head here? Looks like a Torx head, and it is. And there is a special kind of socket that goes on top of that. It's called an E-socket. That's how you move that around. And again, local Harbor Freight came through for me. I purchased their Icon line, which is their serious professional line of E-sockets for 1/4 and 3/8 drive. One of those 2 ought to have one I need. And I'll call that out when I figure out exactly what size it is. So that's what we're doing tonight. We are fixing this hopefully fixing that. And this is already fixed. So let's get to it. All right, guys, like I said, I bring you back, and it turns out in the 1/4 drive, it is an E8 is the sizing. So I'm going to try this out. I think I have an E8 and 3/8, so if I don't get the leverage I need, I'll bump up to that. Okay, if you've never seen a tap and die in action, this is the tap. It's the cutter. This one matches our bolt in question. That's an M10. This is the holder. A very crappy one at that, but 20 bucks at Harbor Freight. What do you expect? Anyway, the idea is you take your cutter, you line up on your hole. You want to make sure your approach is perfect. If you're off angle in any direction, that's going to affect the rest of your cut. So you want to try to go in as true as possible and then very slowly start turning. You want to spray in some kind of a penetrating oil, lubing oil. I'm using PB Blaster. That works. And you turn a little bit, and you stop, and you turn back, and then you turn a little bit more, and then you stop, and you turn a little bit back. That's so that metal chips don't get fouled up in your hole, messing with your cut. And that's basically it. You take it nice and slow, and if it binds up on you, you back off. You figure out how lucky you feel, and then you can try going forward or not. Because, like I said, if you snap a tap off low inside of a housing, you're in a world of pain, because at that point you're going to the machine shop. Unless you're just a regular Davy Crockett with a drill and a metal cutting tip. So this is the booger in question. As you can see, the bolt is all the way in. So I had only damaged the first couple of threads. I ran the tap in maybe 5-6 turns total. And then I tried out the bolt, and it's a little bit tight, but it will go. So this is a good enough repair for me to get this done. I'm going to consider myself quite lucky. Might even go buy a lotto ticket tomorrow. You get what you pay for with tap and die kits. This is only a $20 kit, but it was enough to get the job done. So I'm going to back this out, and then I will put all this back together again, and we should be good to go. Moral of the story: if you've got a piece of metal that's slightly in the way of your bolt hole, take the extra 5 minutes, get the alignment right, then run it in instead of trying to shoehorn it in. My shoehorning turned into an extra hour of work and $20 in parts. So yeah, slow down and take your time. Very important. Okay guys, as you can see, it is all back together and our bolt is nice and snug. I reconnected the O2 sensor. Got our engine mount back on. That looks good. And this O2 sensor is good. You saw that earlier, so that's nice and tight. And this is connected. So that's going to do it for tonight. Tomorrow, I'll do more prep work. I'm not 100% certain what I'm going to do. My brother may come over. I think we're going to try tackling draining any fluid out of the new torque converter, or new to us torque converter, and getting it ready for installation into the new transmission. We're getting close, guys. The aim is to, at a minimum, have all this back together, the whole powertrain back together, and in the vehicle this weekend. Don't know if we're going to have it all together to where you can turn the key and she goes, but that's the goal. We're getting there. See you guys tomorrow. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. Today's focus is going to be all about transmission. We're going to start out with trying to flush out any water that could possibly be in the torque converter. We noticed that we had some emulsified oil dripping out, and emulsified is a fancy word meaning oil mixed with water. And that's why you get kind of that vanilla milkshakey look you see there. That should be red, Mercon LV compliant fluid. It's not red. So we're going to try taking maybe half a quart of ATV, or excuse me, ATF, just kind of swishing it around in there. See if we can get the water to temporarily mix and then dump it out in there. And I have mentioned it a bunch, but we're finally going to do it. I'm going to flush out these cooler lines, except for we need to flush them out properly. And what I mean by that is that we need to run, get a better angle over here, plug these back into the radiator where they go in up here at the top. You can see that, and then down there at the bottom, so that not only are we flushing out the transmission lines, but we're flushing out the transmission cooler line passages inside of the radiator. Why are we doing that? We're doing that because we need to make sure that whatever killed or is killing the old transmission does not get into the new one. So any garbage that's built up in there, metal shavings, clutch pack material, friction material, that needs to get blown out and needs to be cleaned up. So let's start out with the ATV and move these lines again. They have an amazing ability to get where you do not want them to be. I mean, there's the law of cables, which if you don't know, it says that if two or more cables are in close proximity, they will tangle. There should be the law of cooler lines, that if there's a cooler line within 20 feet of you, it's going to somehow trip you. It is outstanding how easily it does that. I believe my ATV, or that half bottle, here it is, right here. This is the real deal, Mercon LV. You might say, well, just use any old ATF. Well, I mean, that's an idea, but I want to minimize the risk of bad things happening by having non-Mercon LV or Ford approved fluids in here. Because you'll see later, we've got some Castrol fluid. Okay, that drains pretty slow. It's probably because something's locked internally, is my guess. But we have some Castrol ATF that is Ford blessed or officially Ford approved for Mercon LV. So we did purchase it. We will use it. As you can see, it's slowly going in, but you can see there's some swirl, and that's going to be from a little bit of water that's mixed in there. So I'm going to work on this, since this looks like it's going to be a pretty slow process, and then I'll bring you back with some results. Alrighty guys, while I am waiting on the torque converter to drain, it's quite fiddly to get fluid in it and pretty fiddly to get fluid out of it. I don't know if the camera is picking it up correctly, but what's coming out is a little bit strawberry-ish, so I'm still getting water out. This is my second flush, and I'm just going to keep doing it until it comes out ruby red, because water in an automatic transmission is a very, very bad thing. So I'll keep it that. But while that is draining, because it takes a while, I am going to use this cooler clean here, and that's what it just shot out over there. And then I actually repositioned the end to be above the drain pan. I decided to do the radiator separately because I forgot just how much I vehemently hate this style of connector with the burning passion of 1,000 suns on trying to put it back on. So if I'm going to do it, I'm only going to do it one time, and that's when I put the vehicle back together. So I'm just going to go ahead. I shall use the, see, they have an adjustable tip here. You can pick which size you need. I just shoved it until the barb firmed up tight right there, and that was that. And the instructions say just spray it, and you keep spraying until it's clean. And then once that's all done, flip it over and take the propellant in the can and use that to clean out the line. So I'll show you with this one here, see if I can't shove it all together. Alright, so that's leaking horribly. Let's see if I can't shove that in a little better. See, is that better? Yeah, that's a little better. Alright, so stuff's a-flowing, and we should see junk come out this end here in a minute. It takes a minute. There it is. And that's all there is to this, really. It's just spray it through and get the garbage out, and then clean out the cooler clean. But it's highly recommended you do this on anything you'll be connecting your new transmission to. Ooh, that looks nasty. Alright, well, I'm going to finish doing this, and then I'll go take care of the radiator, and then I'll be back. Okay, so I was not able to make a really solid seal where I could pump the cooler clean into the top and see it dribble out the bottom. So I slowly pumped it in over a period of about 10 minutes, and then I came back with the compressed air I have, and I rammed it through. And that's the best I'm going to be able to do, because what you're supposed to do is screw those cooler lines back in. And as I mentioned a moment ago, I absolutely hate that. So this is what I'm doing. It came back looking pretty clean. The cooler lines are clean. So now it's time to turn my focus back to ye old torque converter. And I really, really, really wonder why Ford did not just stick a drain plug. So you can find them with this drain plug right there. All you gotta do is take the bolt out, let her drain. Fill her back up, take the bolt out, let her drain. No, we gotta do it the hard way. So I'm gonna keep messing with this, and the basic procedure remains the same. Pour fluid out, check the color. If it's anything but ruby red, if it has any swirls of white, any shade of pink, it looks vaguely like a strawberry milkshake, it's still pulling water out. Or coolant. Normally how this happens is you've got a transcooler line, it's running through the radiator is running at a higher pressure than the transcooler line, you spring a leak inside the radiator, and then you start getting coolant mixing with your oil from the transcooler. And then that gets brought back to the transmission, it gets in the torque converter and all that good stuff. In this case, I'm not sure if I did it or it was salvage yard, but water got in this somehow. Whether it be that we had some really, really wet, humid weather for the last couple weeks and water just condensated in here, or straight up water got poured in here, I don't know. But that's why I'm working on this. That's what we're trying to get out. Bring you back when things look good. Alright, after flushing about 5 quarts through this converter, when you look at the fluid, you see that it is a ruby red, which is what we're looking for. There's no longer any streaks of white. It's not pink. There's no signs of it being emulsification happening. So finally, this torque converter looks good. So I've got just a tiny bit of fluid left. This is not Ford approved oil. This is very good oil, but not Ford approved. So I never had a use for it, so I decided to use it for this flushing. I think it'll be fine if there's remnants of it left in the torque converter. So not too worried about it. But I have a little bit left, and I'll use that up in the converter just to finish flushing it out the best that I can. And I'm going to shove a nice big paper towel in it, and that's going to be that until we go to actually do the pre-fill for installation into the transmission, which is under the cover over there. So I'm guessing there was a decent amount of water in here, but it's difficult to tell because at least Ford torque converters are really hard to drain and fill. When you go to pour it in, it doesn't want to immediately drain down. You have to tilt the converter up at about a 45-degree angle, and then you'll see bubbles, and it'll start to take the transmission fluid. And you do that until basically it won't take bubbles anymore, and then you have to hold the converter and move it in circles, because I think there's an impeller inside, and that's what causes the weird drain action. You got to spin that around, and then I was flipping the converter on it, going from side to side to side, so I could hear fluid gurgling and sloshing through everything, so that I made sure it hit everything internally, so that I could get any water that was on anything. And that's what you need to do if you're in this situation. Though, if I knew more about this converter, where things were located, and I had a machine shop, I would absolutely just drill a drain plug and call it a day. So this is a very, very cumbersome way to do this. If you're curious, the actual factory way you're supposed to do this is the torque converter remains engaged to the transmission, and you essentially you power the converter and you get it pumping, and you let old fluid squirt out, I think, one cooler line, and then you insert it at the same time through the other cooler line, so the transmission never burns itself up and the converter never burns itself up. That's what you're supposed to do. It's really similar to when you're flushing your power steering fluid system, if you're working on a vehicle that still has that. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling. It's late. I'm going to wrap this up, and that'll be it for tonight. Tomorrow is Friday. Not sure if I'll be doing anything, but if so, I'll see you then. Alright guys, welcome back on another somewhat chilly afternoon. We have gone ahead and we've put the starter shim plate, which is this guy right here, put that back on the block, and we are in the process of putting the flex plate on our new block. And we have a sheet of torque values, which I tracked down the other day on the interwebs. That's going to give us the precise torque for the flex plate, because this is where torque values really matter. You have to get this right. So take the minute, track down the torque values, get yourself a torque tool. If you don't have one, you can get a fairly cheap one at Harbor Freight, and it will get you close enough to get the job done. So that's what we're working on now, and we are working our way towards putting the transmission back on. So I will, well, let's see if we can't find our torque value here. This, the flex plate, be in there. Flex plate is supposed to be 59 foot-pounds of torque. Let me verify that. Why does everything look blue? Yeah, so it's Newton meters, foot-pounds, and then Newton meters, pound foot, and then pound inch. So middle column, flex plate, 59 foot-pounds, or pound-foot, that's how they put it. So that's what we're going to need to do. We'll get that done, and then we'll bring you back. Alright, this is a click-style torque wrench, again from Harbor Freight, because I'm cheap and I can't buy pretty much any other tools for the value. And what you do is you set your target which is what my brother's doing right now, to 59. You have a locking collar to make sure you stay on 59. And then you're going to turn the bolt, you're going to tighten it until you hear the wrench go
There's 50.
kind of like that. And at that point, you know, you've hit your torque target and you can move on to the next bolt. Now, this is 8 bolts, so you're going to want to have a, not go in a circle. You're going to want to do a staggered pattern where you're bouncing back and forth to make sure that all the bolts get tightened down evenly. So I'm going to put the camera down. I'm probably going to have to put a bolt on the crank to keep this from spinning around so we can make torque. So I'll be back. All right, so you can see we've got the transmission on the move. So here we are. And before we attempt to join the two together, we do need to put the torque converter on. Before we put the torque converter on, we got to put some fluid in it. We'll put about a quart. And the process is relatively straightforward, if not pretty annoying. So you grab your Mercon here. This transmission uses Mercon LV, if you are not aware of that. You take it, you pour slowly because it fills quickly, like so. And then you'll notice it's not really going down. You have to tilt the converter, and then you get much better bubbles. And you hold it like so until you can see the splines, the outside splines, I guess inside splines, that are down at the bottom or close to it. Yeah, we're about there now. And then you rinse and repeat a couple of times. You don't want to overfill it, because if you do, when you flip this on its side to lock it into the transmission, you're just going to spill transmission fluid everywhere. It'll look like a murder scene, it'll get slippery, and you're wasting money. And this stuff's not cheap. So I'll bring you back when we're getting ready to stab the converter on, and I will talk about what is required for that. Okay. We have some fluid in our converter. Again, you don't want to overfill it because it's going to pee fluid out. I probably overfilled this a little bit. It's going to look like a murder scene over here in a minute. But that aside, now it's time to stab on the converter. Now, when you put this on, you're going to need to hear 3 distinct clunks. Not 4, not 2, 3. You can have 1 for here, 1 for the stator pinion, and you're going to have 1 for the pump spline. I said pinion, but spline. Pump spline, stator spline, and then the actual snout. Because also inside of here, there's going to be some flats that line up to that flat, and there's a companion flat on the other side. And all of that needs to line up nice and clean and pretty with those 3 clunks. Otherwise, you're in trouble. Another thing that needs to happen is before you start sliding things on, the inside of this is well lubed already. But you're going to want to take some Mercon LV, smear it around this. Take some Mercon LV, smear it around here. You know, you don't have to glob it, but you want all of this lubed so that when you go to slide it in, it's going to slide. Nothing's going to catch, burr, scratch, whatever. Now, what I'm going to try to do is I'll probably get my brother to be cameraman, and we're going to try to stab on this converter so you can hear those clunks. He's a funny man. Alright. Here we go. If you haven't held it before, this thing's heavy. Let's see what happens. Yeah, pouring lots of fluid. That's 2. Now at this point I can tell you we're not all the way in because we're sticking out further than the edge of the transmission case, so we're still not fully seated. Okay, I think that was our 3rd clunk.
No, I don't think so.
No, it's not. So you keep kind of rotating it, wiggling it, till you get that clunk. Till you get it, you're not seated.
So I actually have kind of a unique view here. The camera can see the shiny of the shaft down there through the starter access.
Okay. Could also be, since we're pushing at an angle, it doesn't want to seat.
I think you're going to need to pull it off and back on. Turn it a little bit.
Alright. Okay, after a bit of fuss fighting, there we go. It's seated. How do I know it's seated? My finger here, this is the lip of the transmission case. It's well inside the lip of that case, so we should be able to close it onto the engine without issue. And I got 3 distinct clunks out of it. There was a big second clunk, and it seated most of the way in. And then as I kept turning it, there was a smaller 3rd clunk, and that would be the actual flats engaging with the flats in the pump. The second clunk was the stator. So all that's in. We're going to put some standard grease right here. And this is what winds up inserting here up against the thrust bearing in the engine block. So you put a little grease there. You know, I think I'll put the grease here. I'll put it in both. Put some grease there. Put some grease here, and it's nothing special. Probably brake grease, standard farm equipment grease. Just something there to lube it so it's not dry. So we're going to take care of that, and then we got to figure out how to line this booger bear up so that we can get these 4 bolts line up and lock in with their corresponding holes on the flex plate, and then you tighten it through that access hole at the bottom of the block, which that's going to be kind of interesting. So I'll be back. So I have some bearing grease from a bearing packing project with the truck. Just threw that on there. I put a slight coating over here, thrust bearing side. A little bit heavier coating here on the snout. That's going to go in there. That's all you need. You don't have to go super crazy. And now we're going to work on spinning this around and getting it to line up with the engine block. And we're going to start. We got to line up the torque converter with the flex plate first because that has to go through. Otherwise, the bell housing bolts are not going to sit flush. So we're going to work on that, and I'll bring you back. Okay, so we are starting the process of closing everything up. And as you can see, we've got, I can get this wire out of the way. There we are. We got the torque converter. It successfully is mated up to the flex plate. So to do that, we slowly lowered the engine on the engine crane until we could just get the post on the torque converter to go through the hole on the flex plate. And then after we had that in easy, we went here to the alignment dowel, which if the camera will behave, there we go. And we got that in next, and now we're going to lightly thread in a couple of bolts, and then we're going to lift the whole assembly, and then we'll lock it in. Now, I want to repeat that before you go any further than this, that if at any point this fought you and it didn't just kind of slide in once you got everything lined up, then you probably don't have the torque converter stabbed correctly. Do not go any further if when you tried to put the transmission on, it fought you at an alignment dowel, or it fought you when you tried to get your torque converter post through the flex plate, or just getting the whole assembly together. It should slide together like butter, and it should get nice and tight, and you shouldn't have to rely on the bell housing bolts to pull this together. If you have to rely on that, something is wrong. You need to back up, check your torque converter, try again. Alright, so we have gone around, we have put back all of the bell housing bolts that we pulled out. I believe there are 8 total. They are 13 millimeter. You may not have this if you're doing this at home, this double nut over here, because I suspect that this was being worked on maybe when they redid the valve body on the original transmission, and they broke this bolt, so they just took a stud and they put a pair of nuts on it and called it a day. So you may not have that. That may actually be a bolt for you. But we got them all back in. Went in like butter. So I'm pretty comfortable that the torque converter is seated and that we got all the alignment dowel stuff good. The official torque value on this is 35 foot-pounds. So we've broken out my smaller torque wrench here. It's another, what's the right word? Another like snap or tilt type like the big one there. So you torque on it until you feel the wrench yield to you and you hear a clink, you know, a ping noise, and that's it. So we're tightening this up, and let's see, I'm not sure what the next step after this, if we get this done, is we're going to try fleshing out the radiator again, get the oil cooler lines attached since I've got some help, and I'll bring you back. Alright guys, one thing I did forget that needs to go back is this output shaft that comes out of the transmission and winds up, it meets up with one of the CV axles. Should be the passenger CV axle. So before you reinsert this in the transmission, make sure it's clean. No dirt, grit, grime, fuzz balls, alien invaders, whatnot. And I lubed it down with some Mercon LV ATF before I reinserted it into the transmission. Also inspect the seals right there. If you've got a banged up seal, you may want to consider replacing that. But everything looked good. So we went ahead and put that in. And then there is a pair of bolts there and there, which we have sitting right over there. Okay, fine, don't zoom then. Ha, 4 times zoom. Alright, so we will take those, knock them in, and we also cleaned this side, even though it probably is going to get mucked up a little bit again. I might put a towel around that to keep it clean. It was already kind of oily from various oil leaks. The boot was torn on this axle, so that's probably where that came from. But in any case, we got that done. And at this point, if you take a step back, that, ladies and gentlemen, is a powertrain. If you've made it this far, pat yourself on the back. You've got a powertrain, and it is ready to go back in a vehicle. Okay, one thing still need to do, working on right now, is putting the nuts on the torque converter to flex plate post here. So this is the second one. Jordan, go ahead. I'm gonna rotate the crank. And stop. Then you just put the nut on, and I'm getting them snug at first, and once all 4 are on, I'll go for final torque. Torque value on this is 27 foot-pounds, and as a reminder, these are 15 millimeter bolts, or 15 millimeter nuts that you're putting on. One thing that I almost forgot Don't forget to put this weather plug in place back over the access for the torque converter bolts to keep junk out. It's 2 little push pins. Easy to forget. Almost forgot it here, but there you go. There's push pins. Let us resume with dropping the engine. Alright guys, we have been stopped, at least on tightening up the torque converter to flex plate nuts. My torque tool, my $20 Harbor Freight torque tool, which saw many adventures, has given up. And it gave up because the little screws that they put in here to hold all the gearing in position, one fell out, the other one's loose.
See how it can wobble in and out right there?
So the head's wobbling, so the gears aren't engaging, so you can't actually hold torque.
If it's held tight and I'm pushing in on it, the ratchet works. But as soon as it pulls out a little bit, my ratchet doesn't engage correctly.
So one solution would be swing by the local hardware store, find a screw, sink it in there. That'd probably work.
Well, you find the right screw.
Or I use this as an excuse to go buy a better low value torque tool, which is probably what's going to happen. Because many more adventures like this are going to happen, more engine swaps are going to happen, more complex engine work is going to happen. So I need to replace that tool. Anyway, we're going to wrap it up here for the evening, and then you guys can join us again tomorrow. We have to go pick up 1 bolt at the junkyard, and we're going to pick up the tool, and then we fully intend this weekend to get our joined powertrain back in the vehicle, and if we're lucky, even fire it off. So until tomorrow, signing out. Good morning, everyone. It's the next day. My brother and I are here, and today the goal is going to be to get this lovely powertrain in the vehicle, and if we're feeling super froggy, even get it all connected. But first things first, we still have some stuff we need to transfer over. I was looking at our mount bracket, and the reason why this looks so rough is the vehicle we got this from, the collision that it was in, it snapped these ears. So the salvage yard we bought it from, they took it to a welder. They welded it back together. They tapped it so it does thread. It threads fine. So what we're going to need to do is take the studs that are missing and transfer the studs that we have from the old transmission here. So there is a bolt, but it's mostly studs. Bring those over. We'll use the E-sockets that I picked up the other day. Take care of that. We just came back from the junkyard where we picked up our missing bolt for the dog bone engine mount that goes on the bottom. It mounts to the transmission. I'll show you on the old one because it's easier to see, but it mounts right there under the axle output. Goes there. And we were missing a bolt. We now have it. We went to the junkyard, actually picked up the 2. They're both M14 by 80s. My brother here is getting all the junk off of the actual bracket that gets bolted onto the transmission, and then we'll work on getting that on.
You see, the motor got old and leaky. It's kind of like people. They get old and leaky too.
Yep, so that's what we're doing right now. I will bring you back when we get that done. There we are, studs transferred. Now these are E8, which is E-socket size number 8. I don't have a torque value on these, so I just got them as tight as I could. This is actually a bolt, not a stud. So anyway, what goes here is the mount bracket for the top mount on this side. There we are, found the bracket, dropped it right in. It's going to try to catch right here on this is the bracket for the shifter linkage, but you can just wiggle it past. There we go. We have some nylock nuts. 1, 2, and 3. Get these on, plus our bolt, which is right here. And we'll be good. Okay, so according to my torque spec sheet, engine or transaxle mount bolts are at 66 foot-pounds, and it may be that we're going to have to get creative here because...
Front manifold is just in the way.
Exhaust is in the way. I don't think that's going to work. We'll have to get creative. But there, for the dog bone mount, sorry. And up here, both of these are at 66. So this is our new click type torque wrench. Same deal. You turn it till it clicks. Like that. And you're locked in. Alright guys, I went ahead and installed the starter. Now the starter has a pair of studs. They're 13 millimeter. And I got them nice and snug, but don't kill them. It has 2 alignment pins, so it should just drop right in. And one of these was a stud. Then you put the ground for the starter there, and then there's a nut that goes on top. So be mindful of that. But the starter should just drop right in. If you try to put it on and for whatever reason the starter teeth aren't trying to line up with the ring gear on the flex plate, again, you probably want to go take a look at the transmission, because if everything is right when you button up the transmission, everything else should just drop in. It's probably not your starter. So I got this in. We are almost ready to take this whole package and start putting it back in the vehicle. We are going to go ahead and take care of the transmission cooler lines, connect those into the radiator so we can flush the radiator properly, and then we're going to start putting this in. Alright, so we did a test to see if we had comfortable droppage into the car, and we found we need to extend the arm out a little bit. And normally how it works on these engine cranes is you've got a bolt, you take it out, you slide the arm out, and then you put your bolt in. Do pay attention to these numbers on the side. That's how much weight you can lift safely with that extension of the boom. So we're at 1 ton right now, and we're gonna have to go down to half a ton, but that's 1,000 pounds, which should be more than adequate for the weight of this powertrain. Alright guys, that's gonna do it for the end of part 2 of this 2010 Ford Fusion powertrain swap. We got the old one out, we've got the new one prepped, and we are prepared to wheel it back over and stick it in. So please leave comments. I'm always eager to hear feedback, and right now I generally have the time to reply to solid comments, answer questions, give out part numbers, things like that. And stay tuned for part 3, which is the reinstallation and the shakedown cruise. So until next time, I will see you later.